Hey y'all! It's entry number 54 of this off-season series where we discuss a different player's fantasy value each day as a group. We are another day closer to the start of the 2022 NFL season. Each day we'll drop a name, go through some positives and some concerns of their fantasy profile, and then I'll give my personal opinion at the end. Today's discussion will be on Austin Ekeler, running back, Los Angeles Chargers. We'll start with the positives with Austin Ekeler's fantasy profile. Top-tier pass-catching back. Austin Ekeler has been one of the best pass-catching backs in the league over the past few seasons. During the 2021 season, Ekeler had 70 receptions on 94 targets for 647 receiving yards and 8 receiving touchdowns. And over the course of his 72-game career, he's averaged an impressive 3.92 receptions on 4.93 targets for 37.9 receiving yards and 0.33 receiving touchdowns per game according to Pro Football Reference. So it's clear he's not just a one-year wonder as a pass catcher. In addition, the advanced stats back him up as being one of the best in the league, and not just a guy who happened to see these receiving workloads because of necessity. In the 2021 season, Ekeler averaged the 6th highest yards per reception among running backs with 9.2, and the 8th most yards per route run among running backs with 1.65, according to Player Profiler, and was 4th in the entire NFL at all positions in yards after the catch with 628, according to Pro Football Reference. Being a great pass-catching back makes Ekeler more appealing in fantasy leagues, particularly in PPR formats. The next thing I really like about Austin Ekeler's fantasy profile is that he's got a solid offensive line. The Chargers' offensive line is looking pretty strong going into 2022. They had one of the worst offensive lines in football during the 2020 season, but made significant additions to improve it last season by adding Corey Linsley and Rashawn Slater. And those additions paid off big time, as the line ranked 10th at the end of the 2021 season according to Pro Football Focus. They will bring back 4 of their 5 starting linemen from 2021, and the only change will be made at right guard as the team replaces Michael Schofield III with their 2022 first-round pick Zion Johnson. Going into the 2022 season, the line is projected to be in the upper half of the league again, and are ranked 12th in Pro Football Focus's initial 2022 offensive line rankings. The last major thing I really like about Ekeler's fantasy profile is his efficiency. On a per-touch basis, Austin Ekeler was pretty efficient in 2021, as he averaged 5.6 yards per touch, the 8th best among running backs, had 940 yards created, the 3rd best among running backs, and 3.41 yards created per touch, the 8th best among running backs according to Player Profiler. Moving on to some of the concerns with Austin Ekeler's fantasy profile. Isaiah Spiller. The Los Angeles Chargers drafted Isaiah Spiller in the 4th round of the 2022 NFL Draft. Spiller was a pretty solid back in his 35-game career at Texas A&M, where he totaled 541 carries, 2,993 rushing yards, 25 rushing touchdowns, 74 receptions, 585 receiving yards, and 1 receiving touchdown according to Sports Reference. There's been some speculation that taking Spiller may indicate that the team might move towards more of a 2-back system a la Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara that offensive coordinator Joe Lombardi was familiar with during his time as the New Orleans Saints quarterbacks coach. This addition could result in a slight decrease in overall workload for Ekeler compared to last year's numbers where he averaged 17.3 touches per game. The next concern I have with Austin Ekeler's fantasy profile is the likely touchdown regression. During the 2021 season, Austin Ekeler scored 20 touchdowns, 12 rushing and 8 receiving in 16 games. In 2021, he had 46 carries inside the 20, the 2nd most in the NFL, 25 carries inside the 10, tied for the 6th most in the NFL, and 12 carries inside the 5, tied for the 7th most in the NFL according to Pro Football Reference. But with Isaiah Spiller now in the mix, there's a decent chance we see these numbers decline a bit, especially since 2021 has been the only year of Ekeler's career that he even saw over 20 carries inside the 20-yard line or scored more than 3 rushing touchdowns. The last major concern I have with Austin Ekeler's fantasy profile is his size and injury risk. It's not typically mentioned as much with Austin Ekeler since he's played in 72 of a possible 81 games, which is pretty good for a running back, but he's been banged up a lot over the past few years. At just the NFL level, his injury history includes a wrist fracture, a calf strain, a cervical neck stinger, multiple concussions, multiple hamstring strains, hip strain, an ankle bruise, and an ankle sprain, according to Draft Sharks, and he's listed as high risk for injury in 2022. Some additional thoughts on Austin Ekeler. During the 2021 NFL season, Austin Ekeler finished as the RB2 in standard, with 273.8 total fantasy points and 17.1 fantasy points per game. The RB2 in half PPR formats, with 308.8 total fantasy points and 19.3 fantasy points per game, and the RB2 in full PPR formats, with 343.8 total fantasy points and 21.5 fantasy points per game, according to Fantasy Pros. In .5 PPR formats, during the 2021 season, Austin Ekeler had 2 out of 16 games with 5 to 10 fantasy points, 3 out of 16 games with 10 to 15 fantasy points, 6 out of 16 games with 15 to 20 fantasy points, 1 out of 16 games with 20 to 25 fantasy points, 2 out of 16 games with 25 to 30 fantasy points, and 2 out of 16 games with over 30 fantasy points, according to fantasy data. Coaching. The Los Angeles Chargers offensive coordinator Joe Lombardi is the team's offensive play caller. Over the course of his career as an offensive coordinator, Joe Lombardi's running back room has seen slightly below average usage on the ground, but has been one of the most utilized running back rooms through the passing game statistically. Personal opinion. Austin Ekeler is currently going off the board as RB3, about pick 5 overall on ESPN, and RB2, about pick 3 overall on Yahoo. With each of these running back entries on the top guys, I get a little less confident in the safety of each of the first round running backs this year outside of Jonathan Taylor. As of right now, my top 4 fantasy players going into 2022 would be Taylor, Kupp, Christian McCaffrey, and Justin Jefferson, because Taylor, Kupp, and Jefferson feel like the safest players to be elite at their positions this year, while Christian McCaffrey has the highest upside of all players. And then there feels like there's a slight tier drop off after that with guys like Ekeler, Dalvin Cook, Najee Harris, Derrick Henry, etc. Because of this, I think that Ekeler's current ADP is too high on Yahoo, and his ESPN ADP is slightly high, but around the right ballpark. For each of these entries, we will highlight a charitable cause or organization. The Austin Ekeler Foundation's mission is to help create opportunities for people to fulfill their passions and ultimately their lives. Here's a link to that organization below. And that's it for today's entry. If you enjoyed this entry, be sure to like and subscribe.